After dedicating 8 years to a mid-sized tech company, I was poised for the promotion I had been promised, till my boss handed it to his inexperienced nephew instead. Betrayed but not broken, I remained silent. What they didn't see coming was the precision with which I began orchestrating my quiet exodus. This is the story of how I built loyalty, transferred vision, and led the best minds from under their nose only to return stronger, thriving, and impossible to ignore. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's strategic. I had just wrapped up the most successful quarter of my career when the email came in. A vague calendar invite Q2 leadership realignment. No context, no sender, just a sterile meeting link. That's how 8 years of loyalty were packaged into a 30-minute ambush. I remember the way my boss, Daniel, avoided eye contact as he clicked through slides about fresh vision and new blood. He introduced Jason as nephew, like the company was lucky to have him. Jason, fresh out of business school with zero field experience, had been named the new regional sales director. My title, my role, the one I'd been groomed for, promised, twice in closed-door meetings, and had quietly built my life around. And now it belonged to a kid who still said bro in emails. I didn't argue, I didn't even blink. I nodded, congratulated Jason in front of the team, and returned to my desk with a face carved out of stone. That silence wasn't weakness. It was the first move. I knew Daniel. He expected drama, confrontation, some outburst he could use to justify what he'd done. That's why he scheduled the announcement on a Friday at 4 p.m., so he could manage the fallout and disappear for the weekend. But I gave him none of that, just silence. That weekend, while most of the team tried to process the decision, I was already planning. Not revenge, not yet, just clarity. I pulled out the numbers regional reports, year-over-year growth, lead conversion ratios. My team had outperformed every other region by 32% in the past fiscal year. My initiatives had cut onboarding time in half, reduced churn, and streamlined the sales funnel. Jason had none of this. And I knew the others saw it too, even if they didn't say it out loud. The following Monday, I made my rounds. Casual conversations. No bitterness. I asked about their goals, their frustrations, their real thoughts on the direction the company was taking. I didn't try to convince anyone of anything. I listened, and what I heard was louder than any protest I could have made. Morale was brittle. Trust was broken. No one believed Jason could lead them, but no one wanted to jump ship without a lifeboat. So I became the lifeboat. Quietly, methodically, I began preparing my exit. I reached out to a contact at a competing firm, a startup with vision, but lacking an experienced team. They needed leadership. I had it. I negotiated not just a position, but a runway. If I could bring in results within 6 months, I'd be given full autonomy to build my own division. No micromanagement, no nepotism, just performance. Still, I said nothing at the office. I showed up, I trained Jason when he asked. I ran meetings like nothing had changed. But behind the scenes, I was laying bricks for something bigger. Because, here's the thing about Betrayal, it doesn't end with the act. It echoes. And every echo builds momentum. Daniel thought he'd silenced me with politics. But what he actually did was give me permission. Permission to stop pretending that loyalty was a two-way street. I wasn't going to destroy the company. I wasn't going to sabotage Jason. That would be petty. And loud. Now I was going to build something better. And then let the numbers speak. Didn't leave right away. That would have been too obvious, too emotional. And Daniel would have loved that a resignation he could spin as instability, or worse, bitterness. Instead, I buried myself in the work. I made Jason look good. Fed him frameworks he couldn't begin to understand. Let him believe he was earning the team's respect, but I was only buying time. What I needed was information proof that what happened to me wasn't a one-off lapse in judgment, but a symptom of something deeper. And what I found confirmed what I suspected. The company wasn't sick because of one act of nepotism. It had been quietly rotting for years. It started with a budget discrepancy. I noticed it in a quarterly expense report. Jason had access to a travel and development budget nearly double what I'd ever been granted. Curious, I dug deeper. With a few harmless questions to HR and some polite conversations with finance, I started piecing together the pattern. Daniel had been funneling resources to his nephew from day one, long before Jason ever set foot in the office. Trainings, client dinners, marketing support, all diverted, all approved. My budget cuts hadn't been about cost saving, they had been reallocation. To Jason. I kept notes, screenshots, PDFs. I logged emails. I built a quiet dossier, not to weaponize yet, but to understand the game I was truly playing. Then came the client reviews. We had a system, internal feedback forms from our key accounts, compiled every quarter. They were supposed to be anonymous, but they weren't. Encrypted, with minimal effort, I accessed the raw data. Clients weren't happy. Since Jason had been in charge, follow-ups had been missed, proposals delayed. Trust eroded. The only accounts still thriving were the ones I continued to oversee from the shadows. But Jason didn't know. He was living in a bubble of curated, Praise, protected by Daniel, buoyed by vanity metrics. And Daniel, he didn't want to know. He needed Jason to succeed, not for the company, but for his ego. That was their blind spot. Meanwhile, I quietly started talking to the team. Not recruiting, at least not directly, just planting questions. What do you want out of your career? Do you feel recognized here? Do you trust leadership? The answers weren't surprising, but they were useful. People don't leave jobs. They leave people. And every single one of them had lost faith in the people in charge. One afternoon, a senior account manager, Nina, closed my door and asked, "Are you staying?" I didn't answer, just met her eyes. That was enough. She told me she'd follow me wherever I went. She wasn't the first. By the end of that week, I had 6 informal commitments. I never promised them anything. I didn't need to. They saw the writing on the wall, and more importantly, they saw the integrity in how I was handling it. By the time I submitted my resignation, I had a plan. Not a revenge plot, a strategy. I would take no one directly. I would make no offers. But I would build something so compelling they would want to come. And when they did, I'd be ready. I handed in my resignation to Daniel on a Wednesday. Drama. No accusations. Just a tight, professional letter thanking him for the opportunity. He didn't ask where I was going. He assumed I was giving up. I left the office that day with a half-empty box and a full heart. What he didn't know was that I had already signed my new contract. I already had a vision document, seed funding, and the green light to assemble a team. The startup I'd joined had a bold goal: disrupt the very market my old company had grown complacent in. This wasn't about getting even. It was about building something with purpose. The next time Daniel would hear my name, it wouldn't be in a resignation letter. It would be in a lost client briefing. I thought I knew the company. 8 years inside its walls. Countless hours building systems, relationships, culture, but only after I left did I begin to understand what I'd really been a part of. It wasn't just about a promotion stolen by bloodlines. It was about a machine that had been rigged from the start. A few weeks into my new role, I met with a former colleague over coffee. Devin, our ex-operations analyst. He'd been quietly laid off 2 years prior during what Daniel called a streamlining phase. I hadn't thought much of it then. Devin was brilliant, but quiet, never political, and never in the right meetings to be noticed. He slid a flash drive across the table before I even asked. I kept it, he said. Didn't know if it would ever matter. It did. The files contained audit logs, private Slack messages, and a trail of irregular approvals signed by Daniel. Most striking was a series of expense reimbursements under Jason's name, fees paid to third-party firms that, when traced, led to a shell company registered under Jason's college roommate. Thousands of dollars. No deliverables. Just money moving sideways. Devin had flagged it 2 years ago in a quarterly report. Daniel dismissed it as experimental partnerships. A month later, Devin was gone. It wasn't just favoritism. It was quiet corruption, and it went deeper. I started looking at hiring records. Several of Jason's friends had been onboarded in the last 18 months, some in ghost roles with no public-facing responsibilities. They were drawing salaries while doing freelance work for Daniel's side ventures, all under company payroll. It wasn't a business. It was a laundering tool. I realized then that my demotion had nothing to do with my competence. I wasn't just overlooked. Ty was a threat. My systems brought too much visibility. My team too much loyalty. I'd built a culture of accountability in a place that had been designed to obscure. And Jason, he wasn't just a pawn. He was a partner. That changed everything. The idea of quietly moving on no longer felt sufficient. The ethical boundary had shifted. This wasn't about hurt pride, it was about structural rot. And if I didn't expose it, others would suffer. Talented people like Devin. So I started preparing a formal report. But I knew going through HR would be futile. Daniel had built insulation layers too thick for standard channels to penetrate. So I aimed higher. I contacted the firm's board of directors anonymously, submitted documentation, internal correspondences, timelines, everything Devin had given me, everything I had collected, carefully indexed. I didn't ask for acknowledgement, just sent the package and waited. In the meantime, my new venture was gaining traction. With each passing week, more former colleagues reached out, not because I lured them, but because the vacuum back at the old company had become unbearable. Jason had burned bridges I spent years building. Clients were leaving. Projects collapsing. One night, I got a message from Nina. They're in full panic mode, she wrote. 2 clients pulled contracts. Jason's blaming the team. Morale's dead. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Instead, I looked over the numbers at my new company. In 4 months, we'd matched half of my old region's annual output. By month 6, we'd surpass it. Every week, someone else asked if we were hiring. The turning point came when one of our biggest competitors requested a partnership. They'd noticed our growth, wanted to understand our model, and the meeting was scheduled to take place in the same building where I had once been denied a seat at the table. I said yes, not out of spite, out of precision, because the past doesn't stay buried when it's built on deception. And now that I'd unearthed it, the real reckoning was coming. Most people confuse revenge with reaction. They think it's an impulse and emotional loud and immediate, but that's not how real justice works. Real justice is patient. It observes, plans, and waits until the moment creates itself. And my moment was getting closer, with my team slowly expanding and our metrics surpassing expectations. I turned my attention to the one thing Daniel still believed he controlled: perception. To the outside world, the company was still solid, publicly silent, still profitable, still respected, but numbers don't lie forever. And I knew exactly where the cracks would start to show. I began reaching out to select former clients, carefully chosen accounts I had managed for years. I wasn't pitching them directly. That would have been too aggressive, too transparent. Instead, I listened. I asked how things were going, and I let the silence on their end speak for itself. One by one, they voiced frustrations, missed meetings, rushed proposals, junior reps fumbling through presentations. Their loyalty hadn't shifted yet, but it was weakening. That was my window. My new company launched a quiet rebranding campaign. Simple, precise, elegant, no fireworks, just clarity. Our messaging focused on trust, data, and the things my former employer was now visibly lacking. We didn't need to name them. The contrast spoke for itself. Behind the scenes, I prepared transition frameworks. Not for clients, but for talent. If anyone decided to leave the old company and join us, they'd find a clean onboarding pipeline, immediate project integration, and support. I made sure no one jumped into chaos. What I was building wasn't just a reaction, it was an ecosystem. And it was working. By month 5, we had 7 key hires, 5 from my old team, 2 from competitors who'd heard about what we were doing. And then came the email. An anonymous sender. No subject line, just a file attachment and a single sentence. Thought you should see what they're hiding now. The file was a buried internal memo from Daniel to the board, dated 2 weeks earlier. It outlined emergency restructuring and referenced unexpected account attrition. More importantly, it included projected losses up to 19% revenue decline for the next 2 quarters. Jason was not named, but a line stood out. Leadership transition has not delivered anticipated results. They were bleeding, quietly, privately, just as I had predicted. That's when I moved the final piece into position. We announced a joint venture with a key tech partner, one the old company had been courting for over a year without success. Our pitch had been better, our delivery faster, and our people sharper. The deal included shared infrastructure and co-branded client engagements. Within 48 hours of the press release, 3 of our former clients scheduled introductory calls with us, signed within the week. At that point, I knew Daniel was watching. He didn't reach out. He wouldn't. His pride wouldn't allow it. But people inside his walls began sending feelers. 1 email, then 3. Then a phone call from a senior project lead asking if there was space for him on the other side. The tide had turned, but I wasn't done. I had one final move to make, not personal, not vindictive, just necessary. Through a former legal contact, I submitted a formal whistleblower package to the board's compliance committee, fully documented, timestamped, linked to public-facing reports and private communications alike. I didn't attach my name. I didn't need to. The data was undeniable. The corruption couldn't be ignored. I knew they wouldn't respond immediately. Institutions protect themselves first. But the seed was planted, and in the boardroom, seeds of doubt grow fast when money's at stake. By the time the fiscal year closed, our company had tripled its original revenue projections, and the firm I left behind. Their public filings revealed a sudden change in executive structure. Daniel was no longer listed as CEO. Jason's name was gone. Altogether, the system had finally begun to correct itself. Now, the stage was set for the reckoning, not as noise, but as consequence. Justice isn't always a gavel striking wood. Sometimes, it's a series of unread emails, a canceled contract, a silence on the other end of a line where once there was demand. That's how their fall began, not with a bang, but with absence. After the internal memo leaked and our whistleblower file reached the board, a new audit committee was formed, quietly, discreetly, not to save the company's image, but to protect the board's interests. When money moves sideways and accountability disappears, investors don't get philosophical, they get surgical. I stayed uninvolved. Visibly, at least my name never appeared on a single report. No one could trace the documents back to me. That was intentional. Daniel had taught me, in a twisted way, that institutions are only as blind as their leadership allows them to be, and he had chosen blindness. But blindness isn't immunity. 6 weeks after my final submission, 2 of the board members suddenly retired. Shortly after, Jason's profile was removed from the leadership page. The language was generic, mutual, decision, pursuing new opportunities, but the message was clear. The purge had begun. Then the clients started talking. You can control narrative when you control the data, but not when you lose the trust of your customers. Word had spread about our company, our turnaround time, transparency, consistency. But what triggered the tipping point wasn't performance. It was exposure. One of our clients, a mid-sized logistics firm, revealed in a call that they'd been pressured for months by Jason's team to renew under aggressive terms. When they declined, follow-up stopped entirely. No apology, no redirection, just silence. It wasn't a negotiation. It was coercion. When they came to us, they didn't come for a better deal. They came because they were tired of being handled. That pattern repeated. Client by client, story by story. I started seeing the outlines of the empire Daniel had tried to build, built not on service, but on control. He didn't see customers as partners. He saw them as leverage. And the market was beginning to recoil. We never ran ad campaigns. We didn't brag. We just delivered. Consistently, quietly. But the word-of-mouth momentum was unstoppable. Partners reached out. Resumes flowed in. And then, one afternoon, an email arrived that crystallized the moment more than any headline ever could. It was from an associate at a private equity firm. We're evaluating a distressed acquisition. We hear you might have insights. Attached was a file. The old company's books. Now under due diligence review. Daniel's legacy was being priced out. I took a meeting not to gloat, but to ensure the people still inside had a way out. I gave names, quiet recommendations. I made sure the loyal ones, those who had stayed behind, trying to make things right, would land softly. Then I said something I hadn't planned to say. If you take it over, I told them, don't try to fix it from the top. Rebuild it from the floor. They nodded. They understood. Justice, after all, isn't just punishment. It's prevention. The final blow came not from me, but from a report in a mid-tier industry publication. A buried piece titled, When Growth Masks Rot, Lessons from a Corporate Collapse. It didn't name me, but it named Daniel. It named Jason. It named the practices, the shell companies, the buyouts. It ended with a quote from an anonymous former executive. Sometimes the best way to expose a lie is to build something that makes the truth impossible to ignore. I didn't write that line, but I could have. There's a silence that follows collapse. Not the loud, dramatic kind that comes with sirens or scandals. A deeper silence, one made of resignation, of reputations slipping into the rearview. That was the quiet that settled around Daniel's company. Within a month of the audit committee's findings, the board issued a formal statement, not to the press, but to stakeholders. A memo with sterile language, realignment, new leadership model, corrective measures. Behind those words, the truth was louder. Daniel had been removed. Jason, untraceable. The positions they held no longer existed on the new org chart. It was as if they had been erased, not punished, not condemned, just erased. The equity firm completed the acquisition at a valuation 38% below projections from the prior year. Was the cost of deception? I didn't attend the acquisition meeting, though I was invited. I stayed behind the scenes, reviewing reports, making sure those I'd quietly supported during the transition were protected. Nina had taken a lead role in onboarding the salvaged clients. Devin, finally vindicated, had been offered a compliance oversight role by our company, which he accepted with a quiet, grateful nod. What struck me wasn't how swiftly the collapse happened. It was how many people had seen it coming and said nothing. The signs had been there. The favoritism, the silencing, the revolving door of talent leaving without explanation. But the culture Daniel built had trained everyone to believe speaking up would cost them more than staying quiet. And that was the real damage. You don't just lose good people when leadership fails. You lose trust in the very idea that merit matters. That was the part I couldn't let stand. So I made a choice. Not to stay quiet anymore. Not to disappear into success and let the silence return. We launched a leadership forum through our company, a rotating panel and anonymous at first where team members shared stories of mismanagement, inequity, resilience, not gossip, not blame, just truth, patterns in every quarter. We acted on those insights, policy revisions, structural clarity, transparent pathways for advancement. No one got promoted because of who they knew, only because of what they delivered. That became our foundation. Meanwhile, the remains of Daniel's company, under new management, reached out with an offer. A partnership. I read the proposal twice before setting it aside. They were desperate. Not because they believed in collaboration, but because they were drowning and reaching for anything that floated. I didn't respond. Not out of pride, but because I had already extended the only thing that mattered. A better example. Weeks later, one of their new department heads joined our firm. No fanfare, no announcements, just another quiet shift in gravity. I was sitting in my office late one evening when I received an email from a private account. It was from Daniel. One line. I underestimated you. No apology, no remorse, just a confession. I didn't reply, because he wasn't wrong. He had underestimated me, but more importantly, he had misunderstood what I wanted. It was never about his downfall. It was about making sure that what happened to me, what happened to Devin, to so many wouldn't keep happening. And that can't be done by tearing someone down. It's done by building something better, right next to the man. Letting the difference become undeniable. There's a moment long after the noise fades. The headline's quiet, and the last contract is signed where you sit alone in a room that used to feel too big for you, and realize you've outgrown it. Not because you were chasing power, but because you finally stopped apologizing for being capable. It's been over a year since I left Daniel's company. A year since I carried a box out of an office I once called home and walked away without demanding closure. I didn't need revenge then. I still don't. What I needed was something more difficult. The ability to hold on to my values when everything in the system told me to let them go. And that's what this has always been about. I've been asked, more times than I can count, if I'd ever take Daniel's company back, buy it outright, restructure it, turn it into a trophy. I never even entertained the idea. Because you don't build integrity by standing on the ruins of someone else's lies. You build it by proving there's another way to lead on than living that proof, day after day. The team we've built, it's not perfect, we disagree, we fail sometimes, but we fail honestly. And when someone falls short, we hold the door open, not the trapdoor. That matters more than any promotion, any title, any quarterly victory. Devin's now head of systems. Integrity. Nina runs strategy for 3 Vertos. We've hired people who once thought they didn't have a voice and we made sure they do. And clients, they stay. Not because we overpromise, but because we deliver and we never forget that trust is earned, not inherited. Sometimes I catch myself thinking about Jason, where he ended up. If he learned anything, if the silence that followed his fall taught him the difference between being handed power and earning respect. I don't know. I don't need to, because the truth is, Jason was never the real problem. He was just the symptom, the visible crack in a structure built on shortcuts and favors. And Daniel, he was the architect of that structure. But even he, with all his calculated control, couldn't stop gravity. Eventually, every system answers to its foundation. I didn't bring him down. I just stopped holding it up. Now, I walk into boardrooms where I'm not introduced as someone's understudy. I mentor without politics, lead without pretense, and I sleep better than I ever did chasing someone else's approval. People sometimes think stories like mine end with an empire collapsing or a villain begging for mercy. But real justice doesn't crave applause. It doesn't want an audience. It simply wants to endure, and mine has. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that quiet doesn't mean weak. That silence, when chosen, is not surrender. It's strategy. And when the world tells you to move on, to forget, to take what you're given and be grateful, sometimes the most radical act is to say nothing and build something better anyway. So, no, I didn't get the promotion. I built the company that made that title irrelevant. And in the end, the ones who followed, they didn't come because I offered them revenge. They came because I offered them purpose. That's the real legacy.